getting settled in here, let me tell you, good morning. It's a beautiful day. Had the warmth, had the rain. Now we're ready for some warm again, aren't we? It's good to see everybody. In our Bible class, we have a new sheriff in town. It's been 22 long years under the reign of Ahab, who's our king in the north. I should say has been our king in the north, but now things are changing. His son is assuming the throne. We read this just at the very end of our last class period, 1 Kings 22, if you want to turn there and you haven't already. 1 Kings 22, and for the remainder of this class period, it'll probably be more of the tail end of it. We're going to jump over to the parallel of this in 2 Chronicles 17, and we'll actually spend, counting today, 2 class periods in at least a portion of 2 Chronicles, which is a little bit unique in what it is that we've been doing. So we're swapping places here. We've been under the reign of Ahab for 22 years. Does anybody recall, and I'll give you a little heads up, be careful in response to this question, okay? Because in the south, who's been reigning in the south for some time? And that's on whom we'll concentrate for 2 class periods. We've been in the north for a long time. We're going to jump back to the south as we do it in the Kings. But who's been reigning in Judah? Starts with a J. Jehoshaphat, okay? Jehoshaphat. And so he's been reigning in the south, but the son of Ahab is going to assume the throne at his death in the north. And we haven't really talked much about him, so it's okay if you don't get this one. But does anybody know his name? Starts with an A. Okay, so you're saying Ahaziah, or we commonly hear Ahaziah. Both are probably wrong. So, yeah, so Ahaziah or Ahaziah is taking over in the north. Now, I just want to remind ourselves of where it is we stand and why our king is no longer on the scene. So in 1 Kings 22, we'll just pick up here about where we left off last week. The Israelites with the people of Judah are at war. They've gone to war with their neighbor up to the north of them and maybe a little bit slightly east. What country have they been warring with? Syria. And who's the guy who's been a real problem for Israel and really even Judah going back for some times? Yeah, not Ben-Hur, right? But he's related. No. Ben-Hadad is the guy who's been the issue. So they go to war against them, and there's this prophet by the name of Micaiah. And the king of the south, he's a religious man. King of the north, he's religious, but not in the way he should be. And the guy in the south says, hey, look, you want me to be your ally, and we need to inquire of the Lord. Should we go do this in battle? And Ahab asks his many prophets, 400 if I'm not mistaken, he asks them, hey, what do you think? Are we going to be victorious in battle? Oh, yeah, go up, and it's easy peasy. He says, okay, well, that's great. Now let's talk to a prophet of the Lord and see what he says, a little slap in his newfound family's face. He says, is there any prophet left, our memory verse last week, of whom we can inquire of the Lord? He says, well, there's this one guy, Micaiah, but I hate him because he always says bad things about me. He says, you should not, my brother, speak of a prophet of the Lord this way. Go get him. Let's talk to him. And so he brings Micaiah, and when Micaiah gets done playing around with him, he says, if you go up today, you're going to lose your life in battle. And Ahab basically tells him, well, we'll see about that. And strangely, Jehoshaphat still signs off on this, being the pious man that he is. They go into battle together. So here's where we pick up verse 34 in 1 Kings 22. Now, a certain man drew a bow at random and struck the king of Israel between the joints of his armor. I know I mentioned this last week, but isn't the providence of God an astounding thing? The king of Israel thinks, well, I'm going to outsmart God, and I'll disguise myself just as a common soldier. And then we're told this random archer pulls back his bow and just lets it go, just slings the arrow, and it hits the only spot that's the weakness on the king of Israel, between the joints of his armor. So he said to the driver of his chariot, turn around and take me out of the battle, for I am wounded. He probably realizes that it's mortally so. The battle increased that day, and the king was propped up in his chariot, facing the Syrians, and died at evening. The blood ran out from the wound onto the floor of a chariot, made a mess in this vehicle. 36, then as the sun was going down, a shout went throughout the army saying, every man to his city and every man to his own country. There's a reason this remark is made. Go back in our chapter here, 22. Read with me in verse 17. Then he said, this is the prophet or the seer talking about what he's seen in the vision that God has given him. Then he said, I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains as sheep that have no shepherd, or as subjects that have no king, is what he means by that. And the Lord said, these have no master. That's by his design. Let each return to his house in peace. So we go back to verse 36. As the sun's going down, a shout goes throughout the whole army, saying, every man to his city and every man to his own country, just as was foretold by the prophet of the Lord. When the Lord speaks, it means something. It always comes to fruition. Verse 37 of 1 Kings 22. Thank you for all of you being here. 37, so the king died and was brought to Samaria. Okay, and we understand by now that Samaria is the capital city of the northern kingdom, Israel. It's just about in the center of the map, and that's where the main palace, there's a second one also, is found up in Jezreel, roughly 30 miles to the northeast. But the main palace of the king Ahab and the queen Jezebel is found in Samaria. So the king dies and he's brought to Samaria, and they buried the king in Samaria. And this nasty remark is made in 38. And someone washed the chariot at a pool in Samaria, and the dogs licked up his blood while the harlots bathed. Now, let's pause right there. Now, this is very fitting because Ahab, this is a guy who allows all of this spiritual prostitution to go on in the land. And is also apparently, prostitution going on in the land. And this is a place commonly where the ladies of the city who hire out their services go, and maybe as well they can show off their bodies to men who might hire them for that reason. And they end up at this place, and that's the water that's used to wash out what remains of this man's liquid substance within him. A gross scene for the man who's, how fitting though, responsible for so much spiritual prostitution in the land of Israel. One of the last things involving him is prostitution in the land of Israel. I think so, Roy. Yeah, very good observation there. I would say you're probably right. And I mentioned this, I think, last week. Dogs they're not man's best friend over there. They're recognized as these nasty, they're not domesticated either, largely. There are some, but they're just these wild scavenger animals. They're gross. They eat anything. That's the way people see them over there. And so, yeah, to have this animal come in contact with your ruler's remains or part of them is really a disgraceful thing. And yeah, his blood comparatively, just like ours, by the way, is worthless compared to the pure blood that's going to spill and come along down the road. Okay, so this is according to the word of the Lord, which he had spoken. Go back to chapter 21. 21. Let's be reminded of verses 17 through 19. Didn't get to read this last week because we were in a hurry to close. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, and this is after what happens with Naboth and Ahab and Jezebel conspire to steal his vineyard. Arise, go down to meet Ahab, king of Israel, who lives in Samaria. There he is in the vineyard of Naboth, where he has gone down to take possession of it. You shall speak to him, saying, Thus says the Lord, have you murdered and also taken possession? And you shall speak to him, saying, Thus says the Lord, in the place where dogs lick the blood of Naboth, dogs shall lick your blood, even yours. So when we come across some of these kind of gross details and we're like, well, that's strange. If you ever ask why, time and again with these kings, the whys and the intricate details are very important. Now, you brought up some pretty precious blood, that of our Lord's. Man, are the details so specific in the gospel accounts. And the reason for that is the details are very specific in the prophecies that the Lord has made. And so that helps us to identify we can count on God, and this is happening because God says so. It impresses a powerful lesson on us. When God says so about other things, listen to him, even the details. He means everything that he says. So crossing back into 22, all these things are being done in fulfillment to the prophecies that the Lord has made, and I think specifically for his prophet that's been mistreated, Micaiah, this shows that the Lord is behind him, and the king shouldn't have disrespected him in the way that he did. As well, the prophet Elijah and the prophecies that he makes about this king. Verse 39 of 1 Kings 22. Now the rest of the acts of Ahab and all that he did, the ivory house. Oh, he was living high on the hog. Not literally, because I can't do that, but he was really enjoying life. He has this beautiful ivory, elaborate palace, and he thought, hey, as long as I have my stuff, life is good. Well, guess what? He doesn't have his life anymore, and now he doesn't have his stuff either, and life isn't good for him. The ivory house that he built, all the cities that he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Israel? Thank you, inspired writer. What a nice segue you give to us. We're going to cross over to the Chronicles here in just a moment. We're not quite there, and we'll read about the rest. There tend to be more details in the Chronicles than what there are in the Kings. Verse 40, so Ahab rested with his fathers, then Ahaziah his son reigned in his place. If you're still keeping along with the chronology of this, we're looking at roughly 800, and with each one of these, keep in mind, there might be a year, a couple years difference, not a lot, but there's a little bit of leeway there, but about 853 BC is when Ahab dies. So we're making progress in this thing. He has a son named Ahaziah, and that's the new sheriff who's in town. He's going to reign in his place. I just want to mention really quickly, as we've been doing with a lot of these, the names mean something back then. The name Ahaziah, here's what it means. Whom Yahweh upholds. That's interesting, isn't it? That Ahab would give the name of the God of Israel, Yahweh, and how God will be your strength and uphold you to his boy. Why is that slightly ironic? Well, what's the background of Ahab been here for the last 22, maybe plus years? He's been a servant of Baal, and at least his wife has been. And he hasn't stopped his wife in all of these advances she's made as a pagan missionary, as she would see herself and her family, to the land of Israel. But this also seems to give indication of, I would say, some positivity with Ahab. This name seems to suggest that notwithstanding his flirtations with Baal worship, it appears that Ahab remained a believer in Yahweh. Does that mean that he's devoted to him as he should be? No, he's dividing his attention, but apparently he would seem to still have some respect for the God of Israel. And I guess maybe in a roundabout way, that's some positive thing that you could say about Ahab. He's gone, though, and now we're going to shift our attention back to the south as what takes place in the time period of the kings. Some overlap and have to backtrack just a little bit as we do this. Verse 41, Jehoshaphat. We've already read some about him, but here's how this begins. Jehoshaphat, the son of Asa, had become king over Judah in the 4th year of Ahab, king of Israel. And that means he would begin reigning about the year 869 BC. So I told you that Ahab, he dies in 853, and now we're told Jehoshaphat starts his reign in 869, and between the two, you're looking at a difference of about 16, 17 years now that we're rewinding to pick up a little bit more of the story of the king in the south, Jehoshaphat. 42, Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he became king. He could be president, also in the United States. 35 years old when he became king. He reigned a quarter of a century, 25 years, so that would mean that he's going to die at 60 years of age in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Azubah, the daughter of Shilhi. And he walked in all the ways of his father Asa. Now, if you recall about Asa, been a while since we talked about him, he was a good king. There's some things at the end, maybe not so great, but overall he was a pretty solid ruler for Judah. This guy, Jehoshaphat, walked in all the ways of his father Asa. He did not turn aside from them, doing what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Nevertheless, the high places were not taken away. Now, this is where sacrifice would be made. Now, where was sacrifice supposed to be made? The only place that's authorized by God. in the temple. There we go. And we have the bronze altar out front, right? And okay, so the sacrifices are to be given there. There's still sacrifices that are being offered around that God doesn't approve, but, again, I guess you could say as a credit to them, at least they're not burning sacrifices to Baal. That's a positive thing. At least they're not burning sacrifices like Jeroboam instituted to the golden calf, going back to the ways of Egypt. Nevertheless, not ideal, not exactly the way God had laid it out, but at least they're worshiping Yahweh. That's a plus. Nevertheless, the high places were not taken away, for the people offered sacrifices and burnt incense on the high places. Also, and that seems to be a negative that's stated, also, which would be a lead into a second negative, it appears, Jehoshaphat made peace with the king of Israel. And we're going to be reminded from the Chronicles why that wasn't a good decision for the king. Now, the rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat, the might that he showed, we'll talk more about that today, and how he made war, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? Thank you, good sir, for yet another segue to the very spot we're going. And the rest of the perverted persons, this is where I want to pause, and we've done this once before, and I've told you, I like the New King James a lot. I think it's a very good translation of Scripture. This is an awful rendition in these places. In fact, I think it's unique. I don't believe there's any other widely circulated translation that renders this Hebrew term, Kadesh, as perverted persons. What do you have in your translation, if it's not King James, New King James?
Male cult prostitutes.
Okay, it's a very good translation. Male cult prostitutes. Any other? What is that, by the way? Oh, thank you. I didn't. When did that come out? Do you know? Apologetic Express? Huh. Yeah. So legacy. I have to look that up. Thank you. I'm always interested when a new translation comes along to examine. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, Carrie. Okay, King James Version says sodomites. Excellent translation of the term. Any others? I think that probably is going to cover it. All right, so the idea here, both, okay, of a sodomite, and also, you're probably aware of the lady prostitutes that were often involved in these pagan temples and the religions and the exercises that occurred. But there at times are also male prostitutes, and the males would use these male prostitutes as they would use a woman in these acts. And so it's not just this disgusting fornication going on, as you commonly see, but it's also homosexuality in addition to that. And the rest of the perverted persons, the male cult prostitutes or the sodomites, so much better of the Hebrew term Kadesh, who remained in the days of his father Asa, he banished from the land. So he's not only helping to continue to clean up some worshipful impurities, but as well as some problems. Verse 47, there was no king then in Edom, only a deputy of the king. This seems to me to be a strange remark. We're talking about Israel, and we're talking about Judah, and all of a sudden there's a comment here about Edom, and notice in verse 48, Jehoshaphat made, we go right back into a conversation of Judah. So where does this tiny little sentence fit into the overall framework of our discussion? Why do you think he would mention there was no king in Edom back then, only a deputy of the king? Geographical reminder might help. Does anybody know off the top of his or her brilliant head where Edom is found, the kingdom of Edom, relative to God's people? Just direction, north, south, east, west. Very good, very good. Bible class teacher always has it for us, right? It's south of the people of God's territories. So, of course, we have Israel up to the north, and then to the south of that we have Judah. We talk about these all the time. Well, I mentioned up to the north/east, you have the kingdom of the Syrians. Now that's Aram or Damascus. So that's where we've been discussing and the conflict between Israel and Judah with those people. Look down to the south of the Dead Sea, and that's where you have the kingdom of Edom. Okay, so does that help any, or does it not still? Why all of a sudden just plug something in about Edom? They have no king, there's only a deputy of the king. Everything's Israel, Judah, little tiny sliver, Edom, right back to Judah. I believe there's a suggestion that's being made here before moving on, and perhaps that is that Judah has become so powerful that she's maybe also ruling over her neighbors to the south. And we're going to find out about Jehoshaphat. His army is immense. The military prowess during this stretch is absolutely ridiculous. And I think what it is that he's also ruling over the kingdom of Edom. They become their subjects, and they don't even really have a king. They have this vassal king that's been put in place maybe by Jehoshaphat because God's people are also capitalizing with their power over them. I think that's what makes a lot of sense, even though there's no direct statement that's ever made about that. Verse 48, going right back to Judah after talking about Edom. Jehoshaphat made merchant ships to go to Ophir for gold. Does this place strike a memory in your head? Ophir. Ophir. Who else dabbled in this place? Who came before? And if it helps any, it mentions for gold. Who had a lot of gold? Solomon. Okay. Yeah, that would seem to make a lot of sense. All right, let me switch maps right here. This is a little bit confusing, this map to me. This is the Arabian Peninsula that juts out right here in the middle to the right portion of the map. There we go, laser beam. And so this right here, that's the Arabian Peninsula, okay? Saudi Arabia today. Now, if you look right up here, what confused me about it, I don't like how the pink right there, do you see that little fork that comes off? The two pink slivers, that's actually water. And I think it'd make a lot more sense if it were blue also. This map, I'd chosen this map for a reason. So what you have right here on that northeastern side, that body of water, is the Persian Gulf. And the one on the western portion, if you will, of the screen, that's the Red Sea. And then these two arms that come off, those are the two gulfs. And I know you're probably better at this for me, but if I don't see it, it's hard for me to picture it. And the picture throws me off. So those two purple, if I said pink, I meant purple. Those two purple slivers that come off right there are gulfs. The one on the left is the Gulf of Suez, and the easy way of remembering that is the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, and Suez, the Suez Canal that connects us so you don't have to go all the way down around, right, on the map of Africa, Cape Horn. But anyway, so you have the Suez Canal, and then you have the Gulf of Aqaba. But you look on the Arabian Peninsula, and this is not 100% certain, just to be clear. Nobody knows without a doubt where this land is located. But it's widely believed among Bible students that this was found on the Arabian Peninsula on the southwestern corner, Ophir. It's also widely thought, although we don't know for certain, where the land of Havilah is found, is that's pretty much due south of that. And if that rings a bell with you, Havilah, it goes back to the beginning of the Bible. Turn to Genesis 2, keeping your spot in our text. But all the way back in Genesis 2, we're informed in verse 10 how a river flowed out of Eden to water the garden. And there it divided and became 4 rivers. The name of the first is the Pishon. It is the one that flowed around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. Bdellium and onyx stone are there. Well, that would make a lot of sense. If there are these tremendous deposits of gold in Ophir, just right across the water, that there would be plenty of deposits of gold that are found in the land of Havilah also. So that might give a little credence to the location of these two places being correct. A second thing I'd like to mention to you is from our verse itself, 1 Kings 22:48. Jehoshaphat made these merchant ships to go to Ophir for gold, but we're told they never sailed, for the ships were wrecked at Ezion-Geber. Okay, keep your spot here and turn to the parallel of this, and it's 2 Chronicles 20. 2 Chronicles 20. And if you want to put a mark there before too long, we'll be coming to spend the rest of our class period in that right around that location. Chapter 20, 2 Chronicles, verses 35 through 37. He makes these ships, but the ships never even sail to go on their mission. Why is this? Verse 35. After this, Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, joined with Ahaziah, who's taken over for Ahab, his daddy in the north, king of Israel, who acted wickedly. He joined him, that is, Jehoshaphat joined Ahaziah in building ships to go to Tarshish. I don't think I have that on a map, but can anyone tell us where, no, I don't think I have it on any of these. Can anyone tell us where modern-day Tarshish is found? What country today? Okay, that's okay, yeah. It is a peninsula, good, but it's way, other direction for you, way farther west. It's in modern-day Spain, or kind of Portugal, right on that, yeah, on the Iberian Peninsula. So I don't have that on the map, but if you can picture that in Europe, the westernmost point in Europe. So they're wanting to go on these, adventures and to gather all this gold. They're wanting to send these ships to Tarshish, perhaps in part to sell the gold that they have extracted. But they build the ships in Ezion Geber. Ezion Geber. All right, now that's the purpose of this last map. Let me show you where that is. This is a little confusing because in the water that you see on this map, the blue, that's not the Gulf of Suez, and up to the northeast, the Gulf of Aqaba, even though it would kind of look like it because you have no others. Remember, they're just this is the Arabian Peninsula, that's the Persian Gulf up here, and this is the Red Sea. On the Red Sea, on this map, you have the two purple arms that come off, and those should be blue also. Those are the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba. And they split this territory so it makes kind of a V, creating another peninsula, a piece of land that's surrounded by water in three directions. This is the Sinai Peninsula, and as you blow up that little tiny section right there, and the Sinai Peninsula, so we talked about the arm on the northwestern side of the Red Sea, that's the Gulf of Suez, and as you can see on the map, the right arm is the Gulf of Aqaba, and if you'll see that little balloon right there, in the northwestern side of the Gulf of Aqaba, that's Ezion Geber. So this is way down south of the territory of God's people. After you pass through even the kingdom of the kingdom of Edom, it's even farther south than that. So the place where these ships are built is on the Red Sea, which could make a lot of sense because going back to the former map, what they would do is this purple arm to the northeast here, they would travel down, except in the water, the blue, and then they would go down to Ophir, which is on the southwestern portion of the Arabian Peninsula, and they would go to possibly even Havilah to the south of that, but especially Ophir, we're told right here. And then they would probably take those extracts that they made on around to Tarshish, which is modern-day Spain/Portugal. Listen to this in 2 Chronicles 20. They build these ships in Ezion Geber on a seaport. Then Eleazar, the son of Dodavohu, that's a good one, of Mareshah, prophesied against Jehoshaphat, saying, "Because you have joined with Ahaziah, the Lord will destroy what you have made." This seems a little unnecessary, but just as a reminder, what did he just make? Ships, a whole bunch of ships. Notice, and the ships were wrecked. Never even go out on their maiden voyage, and were not able to go to Tarshish. So as we go back to our text in 1 Kings 22, remember, we're told of the fact in this passage, verse 48, Jehoshaphat made merchant ships to go to Ophir for gold, but they never sailed, for the ships were wrecked at Ezion Geber. Well, it's Chronicles that tells us why they never sail. It's the curse of the Lord. He disagrees with what's taking place. So why is he against these efforts of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, about the merchant ships and the gold? Why is he against it? First of all, consider the alliance. There are problems in the family of Ahab, Jezebel, and now Ahaziah. He possesses the heart of his mom and dad. We're going to find out here in a little bit. So God's not on board with an alliance that's made with him, number one. But number two, there's somebody else who's invested himself in these very efforts in recent past. It was a mistake. And the king's not learning, or initially he hasn't learned from that mistake that was made. Turn back to 1 Kings chapter 9. When I ask about the gold connected to Ophir, someone astutely mentioned, oh, that's Solomon. Yeah, let's remind ourselves of Solomon's efforts back in the day. 1 Kings 9, 26 and 27. King Solomon built a fleet of ships at Ezion-Geber. You ever heard of that place? Which is near Eloth on the shore of the Red Sea, as we've shown on our map. Let me go back to that one now. So Ezion-Geber in the Gulf of Aqaba. And sure enough, it sounds like we're the right location. On the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom, the very corner of that. And Hiram sent with the fleet his servants. And by the way, Hiram, he's not a servant of Yahweh, right? As far as we know. He's the king of what place? Up to the northwest in the territory of God's. Hiram, there you go, gave it to you. Okay, up around Persia, yeah. He's the king of Tyre, is what he is, okay? Hiram sent with the fleet his servants, seamen who were familiar with the sea, together with the servants of Solomon. Why? What are they trying to do in building these ships in Ezion-Geber and sending them to Ophir? Chapter 10 of 1 Kings, verse 11. Moreover, the fleet of Hiram, which brought gold from Ophir, brought from Ophir a very great amount of almug wood and also precious stones. Look down in verse 14. Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold, besides that which came from the explorers and from the business of the merchants and from all the kings of the west and from the governors of the land. We've done a study on Bible numbers before. Now, God could have used any number here because he says, actually, there's more than that whenever you add this, this, and this. But he wants to start with this number. What he's bringing in is 666 in gold. What does the number 6 in the Bible represent? Imperfection, that which is imperfect. Good. And the number 3, there are 3 6s, represents what? The divine. And I believe 666 in the Bible represents this simple concept. Taking that which is imperfect and putting it in place of the divine. And that's what Solomon had done. He had set up a god. Now, he knows better than to set up and to worship these pagan gods, unfortunately, which he's going to engage in down the road. But he doesn't even realize that he has made something else his number one ambition in life. Gold has become after what he's chasing. Now, you look on in 1 Kings chapter 10, and it's mentioned that he gets involved in the horse trading market. And he starts importing these horses from Egypt, sending people down there and bringing them back. And then he multiplies his wives, and in addition to that, they're not even servants of the Lord, these wives. I invite you to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 17. I know we've done this so many times in this study. But it's so important that we never lose the basis, the very beginning. And we certainly want to grow and move on from that. You know, we don't want to be guilty of the Hebrews 5 and 6 crowd of we never advance, and 30 years down the road, we don't know anything else other than the basis. But we can't ever lose sight of the basis. And here's the whole basis of the kingship of Israel, 500 years before it happens. Deuteronomy 17, verse 14, when you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you and you possess it, dwell in it, and say, I'm going to set a king over me like all the nations that are around me. He says you can do that, but, verse 16, these are the 3 rules. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself or cause the people to return to Egypt in order to acquire many horses, since the Lord said to you, never again shall you return that way. Rule number 2. He shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away. Rule number 3, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. And then he's supposed to write the copy of the book of the law approved by the priests themselves and he is to read it every day of his life so that he doesn't think for half a second, the rules don't apply to me like they do to everybody else. You look at Solomon's life, and where does the departure begin? It's with an obsession over the material, the gold. It becomes, and then it just progresses from there. Hey, we could make even more money. If we start trading these horses, where's the best place to get horses? Right down southwest. Let's go down to Egypt. God specifically said, don't get involved in the horse trading market, especially in Egypt. Hey, the ladies kind of seem to like me. I could get a whole bunch of... God said, don't multiply your wives. He set up all of these gods before he turns to what we traditionally think of gods around him. So when we go back to our text of 1 Kings 22, and we're reading this about Jehoshaphat and how the Lord's upset, and he curses his efforts with the ships that are built in Ezion Geber. Why does he do that? One's because of the alliance. Evil company corrupts good habits. The second one is, I believe he's following the pattern of Solomon. And he's starting to turn his heart away from the Lord, and he wants to excessively multiply his gold and his silver. As we continue in 1 Kings 22, verse 49, notice, then Ahaziah, the son of Ahab, the wicked one, says to Jehoshaphat, let my servants go with your servants in the ship. But Jehoshaphat would not. He wants to continue in this shipbuilding industry. And he says basically, look, I've gotten my answer from the Lord. He doesn't want me to connect with this. I'm disconnecting from these efforts. That's a credit to Jehoshaphat. It shows you the kind of pious person that he was. The lasting mark on us is not whether we've made mistakes. That's everyone. We've all done that. But the lasting mark is, do we receive correction from God's hand when it's given to us? He's been corrected for doing something wrong, and he says, I'm done with that. I'm not doing it anymore. This is a good guy about whom we're talking. Well, eventually his reign comes to an end. Verse 50, Jehoshaphat rested with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David, his father, and Jehoram, his son, reigned in his place. I know we haven't finished the chapter, but that's intentionally. We're going to leave this little sliver for a few weeks down the road. And now let's jump ship, no pun intended, as we've been promising, from the Kings to 2 Chronicles. So let's go to 2 Chronicles, and we'll spend just the little time we have remaining in that place. 2 Chronicles chapter 17. Our memory verse is coming up, number 3, just a heads up. Verse 1, though, first. Then Jehoshaphat his son reigned in his place and strengthened himself against Israel. Now, I know we've been experiencing some better relations between the two of these countries, but you go back a few years, remember we're over a decade separated from where we were before, and there was the need to strengthen the border between the two because they were in conflict between one another. But now, where we've been, relations have improved. We're at the front side of this at the moment, and when tensions were still hot, he needed to strengthen himself against Israel. Verse 2, and he placed troops in all the fortified cities of Judah and set garrisons in the land of Judah and in the cities of Ephraim, which would appear to be in Israel, which Asa his father had taken. All right, who would like to say our memory work in verse 3? 2 Chronicles 17:3. Pretty short and sweet one. Roy, please do the honors. There you go. There's something different about him, right? I say that. A lot of the kings of Judah, well, a number of them, they're pretty good rulers. Israel, they're all rotten to the core. There are some times of slight reformation in a few of their lives, and that's a positive. But he walks in the way of his father David, doesn't turn aside to the left, to the right. One thing he for certain does not do is seek the Baals. He is totally disconnected from them. Verse 4, but he sought the God of his father, and he walked in his commandments. Good job, by the way, Roy. And not according to the acts of Israel. Therefore the Lord established the kingdom in his hand. All Israel gave presents to Jehoshaphat. He had riches and honor and abundance. His heart took delight in the ways of the Lord. Is this not refreshing? I'm appreciative of just how descriptive the writer is. He's like, at a time when they're so rotten, it's kind of nice to hear positivity after positivity after positivity. Moreover, he removed the high places and the wooden images from Judah. Also, in the 3rd year of his reign, he sent his leaders, also related to old Hur, Ben-Hail, Obadiah, Zechariah, Nethanel, and Micaiah. And we see some familiar names there. I don't believe these are the prophets with whom we're so familiar. And Micaiah, I don't know if this is the same Micaiah of whom, these are common names back then. Micaiah, although it's possible that he could be a prophet from Judah, goes to Israel, and the king of Israel imprisons him. That could be. Micaiah, to teach in the cities of Judah, and he sent with them Levites, Shemaiah, Nethaniah, Zebediah, Asahel, Shemiramoth, no, that's right, okay. Jehonathan, Adonijah, Tobijah, and Tobadonijah, the Levites, and with them Elishama and Jehoram, the priests. So they taught in Judah and had the book of the law of the Lord with them. They went throughout all the cities of Judah and taught the people. Look at the result. And the fear of the Lord fell on all the kingdoms of the lands that were around Judah, so that they did not make war with Jehoshaphat. It's amazing what Scripture does when we just allow the power of God to work. And it's as simple as when we ignore it, we stop teaching it, we turn aside to something else, the whole land becomes rotten in no time. But in a land that's very similar to this one, when we just talk about the Lord, the ways of the Lord, and have his ways taught, people listen. They're fascinated by it. There's a lot of responsibility on us when we're in positions of authority. If we're teachers, if we're preachers, if we're elders, if we're deacons, if we're moms and we're dads and families, there's no limit to the difference we can make. And the great thing is we don't have to contain all the power. Don't worry about that. Well, it could be like Moses. Well, I'm not eloquent. I just zip it and go, dude. Just do what I told you. Just tell them what I'm saying. That's where the power is found, and it's going to make results. Paul?
I'm reminded of the ultimate result.
Yeah, very good. And the thing that's even better than having to show your power in war is not having to fight the war in the first place. Isn't that a lot better? Yeah, very good, Paul. Appreciate that remark. 11, also some of the Philistines brought Jehoshaphat presents and silver as tribute. The Arabians brought him flocks, 7,700 rams and 7,700 male goats. Almost like they even have a respect for the Israelite God. They're learning the numerology of the Lord of Israel. And if we can go back here, I would like to show you just really quickly. I know we're just about out of time. But for Judah, those to the west in the Philistine states, showing great respect. Those to the south, and now I'm going to have to go back again to do that. This is in the Sinai Peninsula area, the Arabian Peninsula, right here. The Arabians, this huge area here, and from the land of Ophir, they bring him tribute also. 12, so Jehoshaphat became increasingly powerful. He built fortresses and storage cities in Judah. He had much property in the cities of Judah. The men of war, mighty men of valor, were in Jerusalem. These are their numbers, and this is where we'll end, according to their fathers' houses. Of Judah, the captains of thousands, Adnah the captain, and with him 300,000 mighty men of valor. Next to him was Jehohanan, the captain, and with him 280,000. And next to him was Amasiah, the son of Zikri, who willingly offered himself to the Lord, and with him 200,000 mighty men of valor. Benjamin, Eliada, a mighty man of valor, and with him 200,000 men armed with bow and shield. Next to him was Jehozabad, and with him 180,000 prepared for war. These served the king, besides those the king put in the fortified cities throughout all Judah. Anybody adding those up as we went through? I wasn't just right here, but look at you. Very nice. So I was like you, spend a little bit of time doing this. You add them all up, and you have 1.16, or if you prefer, 1,160,000 soldiers. And as he states, that's really not all of them. That's just the main, supply of them. In addition to all these strongholds he has in the city, on these cities all throughout the territory of Judah. You're talking, this is a small area, a massive army. People don't want to mess with him. There's strength in the part of Jehoshaphat, but his strength's really not found in his military. His strength's found in the Lord, and the Lord blesses him because he's serving him. Now, I hope that helps us to better understand this concept that Ahab wants to align himself with Jehoshaphat. Everybody wants to align themselves with Jehoshaphat right now. The Philistines, the Arabians want to do so. When I was growing up, I still have, of course, an older brother of 6 years. I was pretty proud, still am very proud of my big brother. But I was especially grateful as a kid that was about this much shorter and about 30 pounds lighter than everybody else to have the big, strong brother that I did. I felt safe with him wherever I went. Ahab looks at this guy, and he quite literally says, I want to have you as my brother. And he makes this arrangement where he gets him into the family. And this is going to be his big brother. And Ahab thinks, hey, I'm okay as long as I'm walking beside my big, strong brother. Everything's going to be just fine. We'll pick up next week in that spot. Next week's our meeting, so 2 weeks. We'll pick up in this place. Let's do chapters 18 and 19 of 2 Chronicles. We're keeping it parked right here, 2 Chronicles. 18 is going to be a review of what we've already studied, but there are more details that we need to consider, and it's from the Judah perspective instead of the Israelite one. And then we'll conclude with chapter 19 in this little section of the prophets of Ahab and Jehoshaphat. Memory work. Let's do chapter 19, verse 2. Verse 2 of chapter 19 in 2 Chronicles. But before we take a little break here, any other thoughts that you'd like to bring out? Okay, I appreciate your attention. Looking forward to that in a couple of weeks. And our meeting next week.